You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our Dinner and Dialogue gathering on December 10th, 2025. Thanks for tuning in. Good evening, friends. As we pause for a dialogue here in the second week of Advent together, a season that invites us into waiting, wondering, and widening our sense of what's possible, I want to reflect with you on a word we all think we understand until we really try to practice it: peace. So if you're anything like me, I tend to place peace on the opposite side of my longing, as though longing is the problem and peace is somehow the solution. Anybody else? But in contemplative spirituality, those two are not enemies. They actually need each other, so longing is the doorway into peace, and restlessness can be the very texture of spiritual growth. And it's our unrest, far from being evidence of failure, that's often the sign that something true and alive is trying to emerge. So tonight, I want to explore peace not as the absence of those longings, but as the spaciousness to hold them well. And tending to this longing is the very heart of Advent. So when we talk about peace in a contemplative way, we're not talking about a feeling, okay? I want to make that very clear at the outset. Instead, we're talking about a repatterning of our inner lives, a way of training our attention, a reorientation of the nervous system towards spaciousness rather than constriction. So think about the last time you longed for something deeply. Something you didn't yet have words for. Maybe you longed for a shift in a relationship. Maybe you longed for a clearer sense of direction in a season of feeling lost. Or maybe you longed for relief from some anxiety you were carrying, or a community where you could feel truly held. Or maybe a longing for the world is what you have. A longing for it to be less violent or less unjust or less exhausting. Anybody know what I mean? Longing has a way of stirring the waters, doesn't it? It creates unrest inside of us, and often this is where we assume peace must be absent, right? But the contemplative path suggests the opposite. Peace is actually the depth beneath the waves, not the surface above them. So Richard Rohr says that spiritual maturity is not the reduction of emotion, but the reduction of reactivity. Do you see the difference with me? Meaning peace is not what happens when we calm down our longing or we stop having emotional content. It's what happens when we learn to breathe inside of those emotions. Peace isn't pushing away emotion, but learning to witness them in loving kindness. So awakening always comes in the midst of whatever is already happening. Because peace isn't the resolution of longing. Peace is the gentle presence that accompanies longing. Peace doesn't quiet unrest by force. Peace holds unrest with compassion. You know, in process thought, every moment contains what we would call a lure toward harmony. That lure doesn't erase longing, it guides it. It shapes our unrest into a creative expression, and it softens our survival responses into new openings. So it whispers that the next small step is always possible, even when the bigger picture is unclear. If we're being honest, we probably all carry places where we feel incomplete, don't we? Where we feel unresolved or worn thin. And what Advent opens up for us is that these are the regions of our lives where longing becomes more vivid. The desire for clarity that hasn't come. The desire for connection that still feels tentative. The desire for an inner calm that remains elusive. The desire for a world that matches our values. These longings aren't obstacles to peace. They're invitations deeper into it. But often, we treat them as something to get rid of. We tell ourselves, once I fix this, then I'll be at peace. But peace rarely waits for us to feel finished. More often, it meets us exactly where we feel undone. Your longing is a compass, and your unrest is a teacher. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, "We must live with a divine dissatisfaction, a holy unrest that keeps us reaching toward what is truer, deeper, more just, and more whole." And yet, contemplative wisdom reminds us that we can hold this dissatisfaction with gentleness. Peace is what lets us carry longing without being swallowed up by it. In this sense, peace is not an escape from our longings. It's the spaciousness in which our longings can breathe. One of the biggest misconceptions is that peace requires stepping away from life and away from longing or away from anything messy or unresolved. But peace is not withdrawal, it's presence. Presence to the moment, presence to ourselves, presence to the quiet movements within us that we often overlook. So when we hold our longings with present moment awareness, something shifts. Instead of trying to solve or suppress them, we begin to listen to them. And often they soften, not because they're resolved, but because they finally feel heard and held. This kind of presence becomes a powerful source of peace, a peace that doesn't require certainty or depend on outcomes, because peace doesn't arrive when longing ends. It arrives when we realize our longing has been sacred all along. And it's worth naming that the Advent Christian tradition has long spoken of this time as a season of waiting for Christ to come. But remember, in contemplative spirituality, the coming of Christ is not just an event in history, it's an awakening in the present moment. You know, the mystic Meister Eckhart used to talk about the birth of Christ in the soul, or God in the soul. Christ is merely not just a figure arriving from out there or a story about a baby a long time ago, but it's about a presence arising in here, in the terrain of our own awareness and our longing and our becoming. Because the divine is always arriving, and Advent simply helps us notice it. It invites us into it. So when early Christians spoke of Christ coming into the world, they weren't only describing a birth. They were naming a pattern that God keeps arriving wherever possibility is needed, wherever love can take root, or wherever a new imagination is trying to break through. So in this contemplative framing, the Advent expectation becomes deeply personal. Where is the Christ presence or awareness wanting to be born in me? Where is a new tenderness emerging? Where is courage taking shape? Where is compassion trying to deepen or break through? Where might I be invited to embody peace rather than just think about it? The coming of Christ, then, becomes more about becoming available to a presence already stirring in the depths of our lives. The Christ light doesn't erase our longing, it illuminates it. It doesn't remove our unrest, it moves with us inside it. And it keeps revealing that every moment, every breath carries the possibility of new birth. So, once peace begins to take root within us, not as calm, but as a certain capacity, it naturally flows outward into how we live. And here's the important part. Your longing, when held contemplatively, becomes a gift to the world. Because longing held with spaciousness turns into compassion. Longing held with presence turns into courage. Longing held with honesty turns into connection. And this is why real peacemaking begins with the inner life. We can't offer what we don't possess. But when we begin to cultivate peace inside our own unrest, we begin to live differently. Peace becomes visible when we respond rather than react, when we treat ourselves with tenderness rather than judgment, when we refuse to participate in cycles of dehumanization, when we, and this might be the most important insight, when we let our longings for a better world guide our actions, not fuel our despair. Do you see that? That's so vital. Our longing is a place where we can be guided into just action instead of moving into cynicism and disdain and despair. This is peacemaking, Not because you've solved your own life, but because you're living awake inside of it. In the contemplative imagination, peace is not a destination, it's a way of traveling through the world. And the good news is that longing is not something we carry alone, and peace isn't something we form alone. Communities like ours are places where longing becomes less isolating, where unrest becomes less frightening, and where we witness the sacred work of unfolding in one another, where our stories can be held and not solved. That's hopefully what we're trying to do around the table every week, right? Have you ever sat with someone at your table here at Way Collective, and as soon as you shared, they jumped in to offer their advice or their thoughts or to tell you what you can do to solve your situation? I'd imagine it's probably happened, right? We've all experienced that. And yet, what we're trying to foster here is belonging. And belonging creates the conditions for peace because it gives our longings a home, and it lets us be unfinished in the presence of others. It reminds us that spiritual growth isn't linear, it's cyclical or seasonal and organic, and it doesn't need fixing or saving. We are attempting to be unfinished in the presence of one another. And my hope is that Way Collective is a place where peace is practiced one conversation at a time and one meal at a time, where we learn how to carry both our restlessness and our hope with honesty and courage. So as we move through Advent, here's the invitation I want to place gently before us tonight. Let peace become a practice within your longing, not in spite of it. So when you feel restless, bring awareness. When you desire something more, bring your breath. When you ache for a world that feels far away, bring compassion to the ache itself. When your heart leans toward the future, let the present moment expand around it. And ask yourself, what is the longing beneath my unrest trying to teach me? Or how is it drawing me more deeply into love? We can ask, where is peace already trying to take root in me? Or what small choice can I make this week that cultivates peace rather than reactivity? Or we could ask, how might my own longing become a source of compassion for someone else? Because the peace we cultivate within our own longings becomes the peace we create in the world. The world doesn't need us to be untroubled. Imagine that. Could you imagine? If we were unaffected by the world, we would lose our very humanity. Instead, the world needs us to be awake. Awake enough to hold our longings with gentleness, awake enough to act with courage when fears arise, awake enough to let peace shape the way we walk through our days. So friends, this Advent, as the days get darker a little earlier, perhaps the invitation is to tend gently to your longing so you can recognize that it's holy. Perhaps we might uncover that our unrest is a signal of life, that peace is already rising within you, quietly, deeply. Christ consciousness is being born in you and in me, and it's about making space for it. So may we each keep saying yes to it, may we keep becoming it, and may our longing and our peace together become a gift to a world in our aching and our healing. Amen. All right, well, I want to offer 3 contemplative questions for conversation tonight. So we'll begin with the first question, which is the self question. Where in your own life do you feel both longing and unrest right now? And what would it look like to hold those experiences with gentleness rather than urgency? Number 2, the sacred question. Where might the presence of the sacred, or the Christ awareness, or the deep inner wisdom be quietly trying to take shape in you this season? And how can you make space to welcome that arrival? And lastly, the society question. What small, grounded practice of peacemaking feels possible in your relationships or community this week? Something that grows from your inner life rather than bypasses it. Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.